to just say a few words of welcome and then we'll get started. As I said to some of you who have already arrived, I'm Dinah Swain. I'm with the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. So pleased you're with us today. The webinar tonight is brought to you by two hosts. One is my organization, the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. We're the philanthropic partner for all 5 national parks on Lake Superior, including the one we're talking about tonight, of course, the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. I'd like to give a big thanks to our co-hosts for tonight, the Friends of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore and its leader, Jeff Renicky. Together, we're bringing this webinar to you free of charge, and we're so happy that you're joining us. Our format for tonight is going to be pretty informal. I'll introduce you in a moment to our panelists, and they will do a presentation telling their story behind the story that appeared in the March issue of National Geographic Magazine, an online version as well. After they've shared their stories, we'll take some questions, and if you have any, send them our way in the chat. We'll be able to see them. That's in the lower right hand of most of your corners, I believe, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So I'll introduce our speakers for the night, and then we can get started. First, he almost needs no introduction, but David Guttenfelder is an award-winning photojournalist focusing on geopolitics and conservation. He spent 20 years as a photojournalist for the Associated Press, during which he was based in Nairobi, Abidjan, New Delhi, Jerusalem, and Tokyo, covering news in more than 75 countries around the world. He has photographed multiple stories in National Geographic Magazine, including topics as diverse as migratory songbirds in North Africa, the damming of the Mekong River, hidden North Korea, and the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. He's won many, many prizes for his awards, for his photography. Such a long list. I'm going to ask you to look at it on our website, but I will tell you a few things. He's a 8-time winner of the World Press Photo Award. He was the National Press Photographer Association's Photographer of the Year and the winner of the Overseas Press Club of America Award. Currently, David has been covering much of the war in Ukraine, and he lives in Minneapolis. Next is Stephanie Pearson. She's a freelance writer, contributing editor to Outside Magazine, and author of 100 Great American Parks, published by National Geographic. After earning her master's degree from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism, she served on Outside Magazine's editorial staff for 12 years. Pearson has also logged many hours in the field, from Brazil to New Zealand to the Arctic, and has received 4 Lowell Thomas Awards from the Society of American Travel Writers Foundation. 3 of her Outside Magazine features have been anthologized in the Best American Travel Writing Series. She's also in Minnesota and is in Duluth tonight. Tom Irvine is Executive Director of the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, and my boss. More importantly, for our purposes tonight, we note that Tom is a fifth generation Lake Superiorite. In fact, his great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather were lighthouse keepers in the Apostle Islands. Tom spent most of his career in industrial services and manufacturing, started a men's pro cycling team, a ski wear brand, and was CEO of the Faribault Woolen Mill Company. Tom now splits his time between Lake Superior and the Twin Cities. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Dinah, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Story Behind the Story webinar. This has been a miraculous journey for this story that started almost 3 years ago. So we are thrilled that it finally made the pages of National Geographic and on from there. So as Dinah mentioned, my name's Tom Irvine. I am the Executive Director of National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation. I am a 5th generation Lake Superiorite and Apostle Islander. And as a matter of fact, the 4th generation is in the audience tonight, as are the 6th and 7th generation Irvine. So we've got this this webinar blanketed with Apostle Island DNA. I want to thank our co-host tonight, the Friends of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, whose contributions to this making this story were invaluable, as well as their involvement in tonight's webinar. I also want to thank the Apostle Islands Historic Preservation Conservancy for their many contributions to this story, as well as Wilderness Inquiry for guiding and keeping our team safe, well-fed, and lastly, to Superintendent Lynn Dominy and the whole staff of the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore. It's an amazing organization, an amazing park. The making of this story was an epic undertaking of cooperation with the park, and truly a testament to the park stewardship of our public lands, and we all can't thank them enough. The Apostle Islands, as most of you know here, I'm sure, stretch across the horizon of Lake Superior on the northern Wisconsin coast like a constellation of stars. 22 islands, 21 in the park, 12 miles of mainland shore, vast expanses of sand beaches, sandstone cliffs riddled with sea caves where the waves leave a visceral imprint, and the greatest collection of intact lighthouses of any national park in the country. The Apostle Islands are a sacred part of the traditional homelands of the Lake Superior Ojibwe. These islands are more than postcard scenery. They are a place of stories, of history, of beauty, and of home. The Apostle Islands Lakeshore. And Jeff Renicky, words from him, jewels on the water. So they truly are. And without further ado, I want to turn the mic over to David Guttenfelder, our esteemed guest and my good friend. So thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Tom. I'm going to share my screen. This project started for me when I met you, Tom, but I'm going to back up just a tiny bit before that point. After 25 years living outside of the United States, I returned to America and to Minnesota as a National Geographic photography fellow. And my first assignment at that time was 18 months living inside and around Yellowstone National Park. It was a cover single topic issue for National Geographic Magazine to mark and celebrate the centennial of the creation of the National Park Service. It was the first time that in my career that I had ever really photographed inside the United States. And it was the beginning of, I guess, a reintroduction and exploration of my home country. And what better place to begin for me than the National Park Service. But as a documentary photographer, I also spend my time photographing some of the struggles here in the United States. And I bring up this image because I made this photograph in 2020. This was the very beginnings of the pandemic and sort of an upheaval in all of our lives. And I was kind of stuck inside, wondering what purpose I would have as a photographer, locked up in my home. And I went out, declared myself essential, and started photographing the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on our communities here in the Midwest and in the North. This was the time when Tom Irvine first reached out to me. He said, "Have you ever been to the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore?" And I was embarrassed then to admit, and a bit embarrassed now to say it, but I had never been to the Apostle Islands and I knew very little about it. And Tom invited me to go there. He said, "Let's take a look. I think you'll love it. And I think you'll have something that you'll want to contribute from there." So Tom and I went to the Apostle Islands. We were deputized as fill-in park rangers, and we stayed on Sand Island and Stockton Island. And he introduced me to many of you who are in the audience tonight. This was the beginning of my first glimpse of the Apostle Islands. And what I found there was a sublime protected, peaceful place. I found a place with a very complicated history, worth peeling back the layers. And I met a relatively small group of people who welcomed me and who I saw have devoted their life and love to this very, very special place. And so Tom was right. I did fall in love with the Apostle Islands, and I did think that I had something I could contribute there. It started out in this way. Some photographs with Tom's writing at the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation blog. I went with Tom in the winter and we started photographing, cataloging this incredible collection of artifacts held at the National Park of Lake Superior. I was invited to be interrogated by Frida, Wara, and Walt at the Lake Superior podcast to talk about our experiences there. I began sharing some of the experiences and photographs on my own social media, where I have 1,000,001, counting my mother, watching, and it caught the attention of National Geographic photography editors as well. And I began posting and sharing pictures and video to the National Geographic social media accounts, which have an incredible reach, some 300 million plus followers. It became a story online, and that's when Stephanie Pearson joined the fun, and she wrote a beautiful story to accompany photographs that I had made on my trip with Tom. It was published on the National Geographic website. It got such great engagement and attention and reception that it became then a story for us, and National Geographic assigned it to us. It's since become a podcast. This is a podcast that was posted, I think 2 days ago, about our experience at the Apostle Islands, and ultimately culminating in this, a story tucked away in the March issue of the magazine. This was the opening spread of the magazine. I wouldn't say this is the most amazing photograph that's ever been taken in the Apostle Islands, but it's important to me, and the reason so is that this was the first picture I made at the Apostle Islands. That's the tip of the kayak of Eric Peterson, of Friends of the Apostle Islands. It was on a little morning paddle that I did with Neil Houck, and so on my trip with Tom. And so this was really just the beginning, the tip of the kayak for me, and the very beginning of this incredible experience that I've had. It's a place that's very complicated and worthy of peeling back all those layers of history. And we began, Stephanie and I, with Jim Pete and very welcoming members of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, who invited us and sort of stewarded us through the beginning of this story. This was a trip that we made to Sand Island, where we heard Jim Pete teaching this group of students, talking about the millennia of Native connection to what is the center of Ojibwe civilization. And it was the starting point for our trip. We also looked, of course, at settler history and the preservation of it by the National Park Service. This is a beautiful and preserved fishing camp on Manitou Island. Of course, the spectacular lighthouses on the islands. Not only did I have a chance to see them from above, but inside and out. And inside and out of some of the legacy estates. This is a these are some of the places of the Anderson family on Sand Island, and the communities and estates that still exist on the islands that the National Park Service and the families and communities are navigating this so that we can all share these places. This is an example of how the people who love the Apostle Islands have found ways to navigate the complicated fine line of protecting and preserving wilderness and making it accessible, and find ways to share it with us all. This is a project on Sand Island by the Friends of the Apostle Islands. We could have done a story about all of the people of the Friends of the Apostle Islands and NPLSF, but this is the person who ended up in the magazine and ended up being the ambassador for the park. And not surprisingly, photo editors chose this image of Fred dressed as Lee Ellsworth Benton, the early turn of the 20th century lighthouse keeper, standing out in front, looking amazing. We could have featured any number of the incredible people that we met along the way, like Cynthia, another volunteer lighthouse keeper, who with her husband spend their summers at Michigan Lighthouse, and who also climbs to the top of the lighthouse and plays the violin every night at sunset. We could have featured the amazing staff of Lindomini and all of the people at the National Park Service. We looked at the unique geology and pristine old growth forests on the islands, and the vital ecosystems and unique landscapes of the islands that are the hosts of all sorts of wildlife, especially endangered birds who pass through here every year. I'm not a wildlife photographer, not a dedicated wildlife photographer for National Geographic. And so I wasn't going to be spending my time on the Apostle Islands in a blind or setting up camera traps to photograph the many important species, martins, bears. I didn't serendipitously get to paddle next to a swimming bear. But what I did do is photograph this absolutely vital and important project between the National Park Service and Wisconsin DNR, Fish and Wildlife, and Bad River, who have for years been out protecting piping plovers and running this research project, banding them, monitoring their nesting, and helping bring this species back. This was one of the most amazing experiences that I think that we had on the island, as I kneeled down and watched this week-old tiny bird with legs as thin as toothpicks released back out onto the sand spit. And it was, I think, emblematic of the great work and effort and importance of this place. I think one of the most important parts of the story is represented by this picture. It's about resiliency. And I think that Stephanie wrote about this story wrote about the Apostle Islands as a postmodern wilderness. And what she said in the story is that wilderness, as defined by the 1964 Wilderness Act, is, quote, an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man. The reality in the Apostles, though, is that humans have nurtured, utilized, and domesticated these islands for centuries. The result is a postmodern wilderness, one of the rare places that, with time and proper management, have reclaimed much of their original splendor. This is what was left of the logging camp And after 50 years of protection of Outer Island and the other islands of the Apostles, we can see nature taking it back. And so that was, I think, the theme in my head and in Stephanie's during our trip. A chance to see the resilience of Lake Superior and of the islands and the land. And also for me personally, a chance to see and to feel the power of wilderness and wild and hard work out there paddling, for us to find peace in this place for any of us who are given the chance and lucky enough to be able to go out into this place. I was lucky to go there because National Geographic supported this trip. I was given 3 weeks and I, for some reason, decided to do it the hard way. And we wanted to make this an adventure. So we set out to try and paddle as many of the 21 islands as we could in those 3 weeks. It was, I'm not an unexperienced kayaker, but I'd only ever paddled in flat water or moving water. And it was definitely a leveling up of my abilities, not only in kayaking cold and famously treacherous Lake Superior, but also how to run a trip like this and how to even pack for it. I had to also figure out how to photograph it, charge my batteries, keep my cameras dry and my computer dry, store the thousands of images, and sort of turn my tent every night into an office along the way. I can only say that this trip would have not been possible without the help and support of Lynn Dominy and the National Park Service. It was, in the end, 125 miles, 18 days of paddling in the month of August. And the Park Service, Lynn and all of her folks there literally sat down at the table over and over again with us and figured this out for us and helped us all along the way. I wasn't paddling alone. I was with, to start with Maddie Marquardt, who is a photographer in her own right, a writer, a kayak guide, an adventurer. And I think if you follow her social media or her Substack and pay attention to what Maddie's doing, you'll find that we have a dedicated journalist out there every day celebrating the Apostle Islands and Lake Superior. And she, I followed her from paddle to paddle. There's also Greg. Greg was the rock of our trip. He was kayak guide. He's with Wilderness Inquiries, who really were the backbone and support of this trip. Greg also sat us down every night around the fire and asked us to go around and remind one another of what we had to celebrate and what we had to cherish out there and among what we've respected about one another. He's in a Current Designs kayak, who certainly helped us as well along the way. I had a beautiful Current Designs kayak, so thank you to them. And thank you to Wilderness Inquiries. It's an organization, a nonprofit dedicated to helping all people gain access to these wonderful places. This is one of 2 resupplies that we had along the way. This is Hannah handing off some quinoa and other food and taking away some of our garbage. She also picked the berries and baked me a gluten-free blueberry pie somewhere along the way. all of us, Frida, Greg, and Maddie, in one of our stops, this time Devil's Island, for a meal, or with Neil around a campfire in one of the amazing campsites, humping gear up and down to the lighthouses and then packing our kayaks every single day. This was Devil's Island, where we were the only place where we were stuck for 3 days, waiting for 8-foot waves to calm down so we could get back on the water. A reminder that the lake was in charge. And a sublime night parking spot on Stockton Island. This was towards the end of our trip, one of the last 2 days of our trip. Anytime that I've ever done a story for National Geographic, I've struggled with the feeling that I could never do justice to the story and to the place, and to the people who helped us along the way. This time more than ever. And I think that's because I can safely say that I've never been as welcomed and supported by people who truly love and have dedicated their time and lives to this place. And so I've felt very nervous about this story, and I have been very happy for this night because it's a chance for me to say thank you to some of the people that made this possible. And to start with, this is Tom Irvine signing the guest book at Outer Island Lighthouse, where his great-grandfather, great-great-grandfather were lighthouse keepers and heroes. Lynn Dominy, of course, who this would never have happened without you and without your generosity and support. Scott Babineau on the left, and Jim P. and all of the Red Cliff Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa, who guided us from the very start. Dave Cooper, he's a rare breed of people who you would want to come and pull you out of stormy waters, navigating the boat, but he's also the person you'd call if you wanted to hold in white gloved hands an artifact and explain it to you and its historic significance. A guy using both sides of his brain, and he was always in the background when we were there, knowing that he was there at a moment's notice to come and help us. Neil Houck, a 35-year veteran of the Apostle Islands. Neil was not only an amazing person to travel with, but I would say that he literally knows every blade of grass, every bug, every animal, every bird, where they're coming from and where they're going. And he was the interpreter of the Apostle Islands for me, and I think for Stephanie. And I just want to say thank you to Neil. And to all of those at the Friends of the Apostle Islands. This is Eric, the tip of Erica's kayak again, but also to Jeff and to Jill Renicky. And to Frida, who is one of a kind. And if you know Frida, then you know this is how Frida always is. Laughing and eating a bowl that she cooked for us that night in Devil's Island in the lighthouse. And of course, Greg and Maddie. This is a place we camped together for a night at the Outer Island Sand Spit, starting to feel like the trip was soon to be over. And Stephanie, I don't know if everyone in this webcast knows or appreciates how lucky we are to have writer Stephanie in this region and in Duluth, who is using her skills to celebrate and fight for the lake and for this place. So with that, I want to say thank you to Stephanie and to all, and to hand it over to you.
Wow. I have to say that is a tough act to follow, and I'm a little teary-eyed actually. And my contribution to this is a little more low tech. I started making a thank you letter to everybody, and this is how many people are on it. I don't know if you can see this, but there's about 70 people on this list. So I was going to list everybody. These are the people who gave boat rides, lodging, wisdom, expertise, science, teaching, stories. And there were so many people, and the Apostle Islands, unlike pretty much every other national park entity in this country, is a group of islands, and you cannot do it without a community. And I am so grateful for that. And so I want to say miigwech to everyone in this room, and all of them probably know more than I do about the Apostle Islands. And for that, I have great humility in trying to tell this story. And David's photos were just beautiful. And so to talk about where I came into the story, it was 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, October, and my editor at National Geographic, I have done travel stories for National Geographic, and this is my first feature for the Yellow Book. So it was sort of a big deal to me. She came to me and she said, have you ever been to the Apostle Islands? And I said, yeah, but I'm a Minnesota kid. Like, I grew up in Duluth, but all of my experiences in, the North Shore of Lake Superior. And, so I grew up, my parents built a cabin on Lake Vermilion, and we spent all of our summers there. I guided in the Boundary Waters, but I had sailed in the Apostle Islands and had done a little bit of travel there for a story that I did for Outside, but I really didn't know the region. So they asked me to write a 1,000 word story to as a companion to these photos that they were so compelled by that David had taken. And so I thought, great, I can do that in the pandemic. I've been there, I can do that. And so a couple months later, they came back to me and they said, well, would you be interested in writing a longer story? And I said, absolutely. And they said, well, can you write a pitch? And so I'm pretty familiar with writing pitches, but I just pulled mine out. And so this is what I wrote, and it's probably longer than the story is itself. It's a 5-page document. And what they really asked for is a coverage plan summary. And so they really wanted to use these photos that David had used for this kayaking trip that he was planning, but they said there's one slight problem in that we have a story coming up in National Geographic that also involves a paddling expedition. So what can you do to tell the story of the Apostle Islands in a way that doesn't just tell the journey of the Apostle Islands through David's kayaking trip? So I wrote that coverage plan, which consisted of numerous chapters. And in each chapter, I needed to list books that I would reference. I needed to list people that I would use as sources. I needed to go through and give a budget. And I just looked at the first chapter, which was about the Ojibwe origin story, because one of the things I really didn't know about the Apostles was how central, especially Madeline Island, was to the Ojibwe. And that was something that really, really compelled me. And then also I hadn't known much about the history of quarrying and logging in the Apostle Islands. And, there were just a lot of resources that I use in writing this proposal, but then in also telling the story. And a couple of them, like this book, A Storied Wilderness, by James Feldman, was just an incredible resource. And also The History of the Ojibwe People by William Warren, which is a classic. And also people like Neil Houck, who've lived and breathed the Apostles for so many years. So anyway, you pitch something to National Geographic and you have no idea if it's ever gonna, fly. And so the real interesting thing happened when they accepted the pitch. And so then you have to actually make it happen. And that's when it really got interesting, because then you realize that you have to actually tell this story. And so that's the point when we reached out to Lynn, and Tom was instrumental in this, and just trying to tell these different pieces of the story. And luckily I live in Duluth, because I counted it up, and I think I took 11 trips over to the Apostles by the end of the reporting. And each of those was a little segment. And unfortunately, not all of those segments made it into the story, but my editors explicitly said, please give us a lot to choose from. And so when all is said and done, when I wrote the first draft of the story, I overwrote it a couple thousand words, and ultimately a couple thousand words were cut. And so my only sadness with this process is that I wasn't able to include all the just amazing moments and scenes. And there were so many, and David illustrated them beautifully with his photographs. And for that, that's just a sadness that I have. But that's the, I think you come into it with just such grand ambitions and really want it to really highlight all of these amazing people who tell this story. And then at the end of the day, some of that stuff doesn't make it into the story. But that's really my side of the story. And I wasn't along on David's entire kayaking trip, and I was able to meet with them along the way for periods of it. And, North Island or Outer Island was one of my highlights of the reporting, but there were many, many. So that's how it came together from the writing side.
Thanks so much, David and Stephanie. I have a couple follow-up questions, and I'd love for those. See a few questions coming through in the chat and in the Q&A. People want to still send some of those. Can I just follow up with you, Stephanie? You said there's a couple stories that you wish you could have included. Of course, you're not just going to read them to us right now, but what are like one or two that stand out that you wished you could have, that you loved, and had you been able to select more, you would have put in the magazine?
I think there were two that stood out. One was right in the beginning of the season. And I want to add here too, that the staff was coming off of a COVID year. And so not only were they coming off of a COVID year and trying to reopen the park, but they were trying to accommodate us, which was incredible. But they invited me out to see a burn on Stockton Island. And this is using traditional ecological knowledge. And Damon Panic from who worked for the Park Service, as well as a number of other Park Service people, were doing a burn. And I had never seen a burn, but the reason that they were doing this burn was because Stockton is a traditional place where the Ojibwe grew berries, and they did this for centuries. And so they were using that traditional ecological knowledge to do this in a way that was effective and good for Stockton Island. And so that was really interesting. And I wanted to delve into that a little bit further. And also Julie Van Stappen was incredible in hooking me up to scientists who were doing research in the park. Like Sarah Johnson is doing these counts of these Arctic species that are, some of them are diminishing, some of them are not diminishing. And so she spends a lot of time in the summer counting these species. And Eric Olson was another scientist. And with the piping plovers, there were a number of people too. Peggy took us out with Summer Matson, who's done a lot. He's spent years in the park. And then also the Rocky and Sand Island people who've had family in these islands for centuries. And so we got to see their cabins and their homes, and they invited us into their homes, and just to see these really deeply spiritual connections for all these people. And so many different stories.
I love hearing that. And I'm seeing some people in the chat. Someone wants you to write a book, Stephanie, about your whole experience. So maybe another book coming out. And it looks like Jim Pete is on the line, and he had said thank you to everyone, Miigwech, for the opportunity, and said he really enjoyed being part of the journey. This is something I was wondering, but David, where was your first photo of the Apostles? Where was that taken? I'm gonna come on. You might be on mute there, David.
I think the question, the person is referring to the picture of, that's the lead image in the story, and that is along the Wisconsin Lakeshore. But I think I can see the questions also. They're asking about the pools, and I think it was the first image that I showed when I was talking about it. That is from Stockton Island, and that was when Tom and I went and hiked out to the end of the bay and waited for the sun to go down.
So another question's coming in about the weather. Did you have any severe weather? And that's from a college, I guess a college roommate of yours. Let's see if I get the name. Nicole, Stephanie, a college roommate and friend. They also go to the Apostles and sail there every year, and they're just wondering what the weather was like when you were there.
Well, thank you, Nicole, for being here. That's so fun that you're on the webinar. I will say that I think the scariest weather we had was we went out to Devil's Island to meet David. I hadn't joined the kayaking trip at that point, and there was a pretty wild boat ride that Coop was driving, and it was just up the troughs. I think that's how the story actually started, and it was pretty wild. And I think, David, you guys got windbound there for a while, didn't you?
Yeah, that's right. We made it to Devil's, and I think we ended up spending at least 2 extra nights there, sitting inside the lighthouse, camping. That was kind of an incredible experience, honestly. I mean, we really had amazing luck and beautiful weather throughout the entire trip, and so with apart from a couple of quick storms and reminders that you have absolutely no control when you're on Lake Superior, we had an amazing weather, and that time on Devils was really, I feel really lucky that we got to experience that safely, because it was a small glimpse of what the power of Lake Superior and the weather.
Windbound, I've never heard that expression. I guess that's one that we have to use when talking about Lake Superior. That's really fun to hear that. Follow-up question of that. Someone was asking about how you replenished and rationed your resources, because if you were there longer than you expected, like, were you in constant contact with a support crew, and were you ever really concerned?
We had constant contact with the Park Service. Thankfully, they just had our back from start to finish, and we had constant contact with Wilderness Inquiries. We had all set it up to have only 2 resupplies, so in terms of food and so forth, we had multiple days of food, and of course all the water we could possibly drink straight from the lake. So yeah, the resupply and that was not an issue at all on the trip.
Someone asked a question about the storm, and I remember when we were chatting before the webinar, you had said that you were all barely made it to shore. So maybe talk about that. Everyone else made it to shore and ran for cover, and you, as the storm was going on, you had said you stayed around and tried to get pictures.
Well, I guess photographers always run in the wrong direction when there's problem, but yeah, that was an incredible experience, honestly. And we left camp and took the long way around the island because we wanted to see some of the sea caves. We were on our way to Oak Island. We got halfway across the pass, and the storm just came rocking, and it was Frida who said, "I don't think this is going to work," and we turned around and raced back. And when we got to the shore, it just came hammering on us, and everyone took cover. I was leaning against my boat. I flipped it over and used it as a tripod, and tried to photograph this immense storm. It was coming towards us, and then right over the top of our heads, clearly just like striking the island. And then I saw it pass and go to the other side of us. A brief, or like really ferocious storm that was really incredible to see. I tried to photograph it.
Yeah, we'd love to see more of those. I don't know how we're going to do that, but a lot of interest in the chat around that. We are fascinated by storms, we humans. That's definitely true, especially if we can make our way out of them. A lot of people saying thank you. They love the images. I'd like to ask, I think for both of you, and Tom, you can chime in too. Of all the islands, did one call out to you more than the others? And if so, why? It's like picking a favorite child. Is that you're not supposed to do that?
That was a constant conversation on the trip. We could have half jokingly like argued about which island we loved the most. But I'll just say for me personally, it must be Outer. It's just such a test to get there. The Sandspit is like an otherworldly, another planet, and it's also where I went to photograph the piping plovers, one of the places. And so it's the place I went with Tom and where he has his family history. It's where I went with Neil and Dave Cooper. And Neil walked on the island with me and explained so much about it that, yeah, I have to say Outer Island is the place for me.
Stephanie?
I wish I could be diverse in my answer, but I would have to agree with David. And the reason is because I joined the kayaking trip on Manitou Island, and then we paddled out to Outer Island, and we just had this crossing that was quite long, and I was quite fearful of it just because we were really out there. But we had just incredible weather. And then we got to Outer and we just surfed up the east side to the north shore of Outer, and it was just like surfing. I mean, it was awesome, and it was so beautiful, and the water was turquoise, and the geology along that east side of the island was gorgeous. And then when we got to the end at the lighthouse, we went into the island, and we could see where Lullaby Camp was, and all of this human, all of these old trucks, and just fascinating Mazola corn oil cans and things. But then there's an old growth forest. So it was really a fascinating, really fascinating place. But I mean, all of the islands are really fascinating.
Tom, I know you're sitting over there on this, we haven't heard from you in a while. Do you have a favorite?
Well, of course, I've got to vote for Outer Island myself, just because of all the connections there. And I also had the privilege to be able to bring my, at the time, 91-year-old dad out to Outer Island to also sign that guest book. And it was pretty special time for him. But I'd have to say I really love Manitou Island, and just that fish camp there is so photogenic, and being a kind of a amateur hack photographer myself, just the faded colors and the old tin roofs on the buildings, and just the setting is kind of magical there. So I'm a big fan of Manitou Island.
So I have a question, since both Stephanie and David, in your travels and in your writings for National Geographic and other magazine and outside magazine, you've been to some of the most breathtaking places on earth. And yet I can, in my short time I've been able to get to know you, both just seem so taken with the Apostle Islands. And those of us who live here, of course, think it's one of the best places in the world. But I wonder if you can sort of place how this measures up, or why this seems different and special to both of you. So if you just take a turn, and because you've been everywhere really, and seen some amazing things, which I know you wouldn't diminish, but what are your thoughts on that? Like, how does it compare? Why is this a special place?
Should I go first, Stephanie? I guess for me, it's true that I've spent my whole life going as far away as I possibly could from where I grew up, and looking for adventure and telling stories about so many incredible, important, interesting places. But I guess I was sort of forced to stay home in 2020. And this was one of the incredible silver linings that I learned from 2020 until now, which is a reminder of that we have people and places right here in our own backyard that are of equal or greater importance to us, and that telling those stories are of equal or greater consequence. And so I it's special to me because it came at a time when I really needed to relearn that, and to invest and rethink my role and responsibilities as a photographer right here in my own community. And so that's why it was so important to me, and I'm so grateful for the way that all of you, everyone, welcomed me into this place.
Well, Stephanie?
I echo a lot of what David had to say. I grew up on the shore of Lake Superior, and I had picnics with my grandparents in numerous times. But then I wanted to go away too. And I think this tug for me to come home was really, really, really strong about 7 years ago. And I did come home, and but the Apostles was unique for two reasons to me. One is that it's very exotic compared to the other side of the lake, which is sort of hard to believe if you don't know Lake Superior very well, that it can be that different, but it's quite different in its geology, and even the boreal forests, it's a different forest. And so it looks different. But then also the people who are stewards of this place. I remember asking Julie Van Stappen a little bit about her, how she ended up at the Apostles. And she, like many of the people who've been there, they came here long ago expecting to just go away, but then they stayed. And there's something about that keeps them there. And I think that that's very, very true for many people who come to the Apostles, and there's something to be said about that, and just the stewardship and the longevity of the Ojibwe who have lived there, for hundreds of years, and their Anishinaabe ancestors, and that continuity is really increasingly important to me.
What response have either of you gotten from this, your photographs or your story? Do you hear from different people other than us?
I'll mention some, I guess, surprising responses. I've had overwhelmingly positive responses for sure, but some of the surprising ones have been, I've been working in Ukraine for the past year, and I keep getting messages from Ukrainians or from other journalists saying, like, thank you for showing us something of what the world is supposed to be like, or celebrating something like this. I've also heard from a lot of people, including someone just now in the chat, saying that what they appreciate most about this story has been a conversation about public land and about how important it is to us, not just like as a matter of conservation, but as a matter of mental health and peace and accessibility, and how important it is to all of us to get out into the wild. And so that's been a really interesting, important conversation, and one that was really important to me.
I agree with that. I would also say for me, there's a real paradigm shift happening right now. And I worked at Outside Magazine for a number of years, and I was made a lot of fun of because I was from Minnesota. I worked there during the time of Fargo, and a lot of people thought that was really funny that I was from the Midwest. And, you know, as climate change happens, this part of the world is looking a lot more intriguing and enticing to a lot of people. And there's a balance that needs to take place. And I feel very strongly that we have to steward that as best we can, because there is a sea change happening. And I want to try to be responsible in that, in the way I tell stories, as well as in the way that this part of the world is represented. And that's very important to me.
That's really great. Thank you. David, I have a question for you. Ever since I met you, which was a few months ago, and you know, you do in my view, two very different kinds of photography. This beautiful nature, stunning photos, and other ones that are very difficult to see. Your time spent in Africa early in your career, and most recently in Ukraine. How is that for you? You know, going from one to another. It's really like the two very ends of life on a spectrum. It's just so, it's jarring in a way to see some of your photos from Ukraine and then see this beautiful, you know, and maybe that's what sustains you. But do you have to get yourself in a mindset when you go from one to the other?
Well, photography has become it's all I know. And it's my purpose, and I try to use it to tell stories that I think are really important. And so I think it's not hard to understand why I think photographing the war in Ukraine is important. But photographing a national park or an otherwise overlooked community, maybe, or something very personal is equally important. So I try to do all of those things with my photography. And yeah, it's hard to go back and forth, for sure. I'm leaving tomorrow to go to Ukraine for another couple of months. And so it's very, very hard to shift gears. But I have to say, the Apostle Islands was soothing to the soul for sure for me in the time that I've been there.
Wow, we wish you all the best of safety in your journeys, David. I'm going to ask both of you too. I'm getting some questions. There's a chat and then there's a Q&A, and I'm trying to monitor both coming through. People would like to know where to find more of your photography in general, David. Some more of your writing, Stephanie, and then someone also wants more information about Maddie. I can't remember how to spell her last name, how to find her on Insta and Substack. So first, if you could all both take a turn and just tell us about where to find more of your photography and how to follow you.
Well, for Maddie, I definitely encourage everyone to follow her wherever you can, and I can put it in, I can put it in the chat, I think. Her social media and so forth.
Oh, there she is. Sorry, I was just, hi, I'm Maddie. Hi, Maddie. My Insta is at Maddie Mark. So MADDYMARQ. And you can find her Substack there. And for people my age who aren't even sure what that is, I'm with you. But I do know what Instagram is. So I'm sorry, keep going, David. How to find your pictures.
That's perfect. And for me, I mean, I have my website, davidguttenfelder.com, but more importantly, where to see more images about the Apostle Islands. It's embarrassing to admit how much ends up on the cutting room floor at National Geographic. So there is a lot of pictures, and in this case, I'm going to be making all of these pictures available to the Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, to the national park, for them to use however they see fit, and to both the National Parks Lake Superior Foundation and Friends of the Apostle Islands, because I want these pictures to be, to be seen and to help in any way we can.
Now, we'd be happy to host. I think we have a lot of your photos already at the National Parks of Lake Superior Foundation, and we'll definitely get some more. The ones that you're able to share, that'd be great. Stephanie, how can people follow you?
Well, I have a website, but I haven't updated it very recently. So apologies for that. It's stephaniepearson.com. And I also have Instagram, Stephanie A. Pearson. But I write a lot for outside, and I wrote a book, 100 Great American Parks. And I also just found out that I got a grant from National Geographic to further study Lake Superior. So that's what I'll be diving into this summer. So stay tuned. I don't quite have all of my ducks in a row yet for that, but yeah.
So I've had a couple questions in here. People who, understanding this many people to keep you safe and take you on your journey. How do people and I think a lot of people on this webinar tonight are experienced and part of the people that help you have your experience. But I think there's a few people, including myself, who have not done this. I assume, is there a way for people to experience a very small part of this? Are beginners available to go anywhere, or do you really need to come to the Apostle Islands as an experienced kayaker?
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because that was part of the conversation that we started with Lynn and the Park Service, is that I wanted to tell a story about an adventure, and I wanted to, get people really excited about the Apostle Islands, and about knowing about it, understanding it better, and hopefully, people coming and experiencing it for themselves. But it's a serious place. It's a very serious lake and it's very inaccessible, very difficult. And so, Lynn and the Park Service wanted to make sure that we told a story that people could understand, was not something to be taken lightly, and so that it would be done very buttoned up and very safely. So, Stephanie, you want to say something more about that?
Yeah, that's a tricky one, because a lot of people do successfully kayak the Apostle Islands by themselves. Many people have done that, but I think you have to be a pretty experienced paddler to take that on. When we were out on Sand Island, for example, when we were camping with the kids from Red Cliff, the wind whipped up and they couldn't paddle home. There was no way with the wind, and that's the closest island. And so, even if you think you're relatively safe, there have been deaths in the Apostle Islands in kayaks. There are people who are out in pontoon boats when they shouldn't be. So you really have to take it seriously. And that's one of the things about, the Midwest. People think, oh, it's not an ocean, but, it's really dangerous. So I think you just have to have some experience and work your way up. But there are places in Bayfield that give you courses, and you can go out on a guided trip, and then you can work your way up to doing your own thing too.
Okay.
And you can also go out on the Apostle Islands cruise boats too. So there's opportunities for those of you that aren't as adventurous, but want to see the islands and see the lake. So
Someone just made the point, it's an inland ocean, really. Yeah, and I think that's true. And there's a lot of resources. You can also, local guides are a great resource, someone said. We're about to end. I do want to say, if you want to, the two organizations that brought this to you today, if you want to learn more about us, we'd love for you to, come learn more about us at some point. I'm with the National Parks of Lake Superior. I'm going to share my screen for just a minute. Hang on, if I can find it. Oh, there we are. So ourselves, we're the National Parks of Lake Superior. You can learn more about us at NPLSF.org. are Friends of the Apostle Islands at friendsoftheapostleislands.org. We're both nonprofits, and if you enjoyed tonight, we were able to bring it free of charge. We're always happy for people to give us a dollar or two to show your love, and as we continue to help our wonderful people at the National Park Service we try to support them and things that aren't covered. So please learn more about us there. We do have pictures of David's, and we will have more. So I guess that's all I had to say tonight. Does anyone want to have any closing words, Tom or Stephanie or David or anyone?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. It's great to be able to tell this story and share the images and just the emotion that went into this amazing story and amazing trip. Tonight's webinar has been recorded, and we will have that available to everyone in the next couple of days. Dinah?
I think it takes 24 hours, yeah, but we'll have it up on the website.
So
thank you, everybody, for joining us. David, Stephanie, thank you guys so much. Good night, everyone.
thank you.